Hi guys, we're going to look at the importance of mobility, common limitations, and how to address them for kettlebell sport. And I should say there are a variety of different ways to approach this. My bias is resistance training as a strength and conditioning coach and kettlebell coach. So just bear that in mind. I've been lucky enough to see some contortionists, circus performers, handstand how hand balances, I should say, and just how they approach this problem would probably be slightly different. And you could probably learn a lot from those guys as well. And all the super flexible people do a lot of flexibility training, which we don't need to be for kettlebell sport. But being flexible and mobile in the right positions will make a big difference. So we'll quickly look at why mobility is important. We'll look at passive treatments, flexibility versus mobility, um, loaded stretching versus easy stretching, technique and positions, protocols, just to sort of give you a bit of a primer there. So basically, mobility um, or strength and flexibility is often how people describe mobility, is really important for kettlebell sport because we're often under load, but being able to relax is a real key in kettlebell sport. So in the rack position, in fixation are typically our main places where we rest. And if you can't rest, or for example, if you can't relax your quads, it's difficult to rest in the rack position. Or if you're holding it through your chest, your arms are up really high as opposed to letting your elbows sit on your body. Or overhead, if you've got a bent elbow, which is common with people with shoulder injuries or elbow, things like that. And you can still compete and score provided your judge is aware of that. And that's totally fine. But to optimize things, you typically want a much straighter position that hopefully relies predominantly on static support as opposed to active support. So the muscles can relax. When they relax, the blood can penetrate or perfuse into the muscle, and it's almost like um, you're putting a sort of comma in between each rep, so you can get a bit of rest and recovery. So aside from basically the relaxation element, um, it's also important for efficiency. So you want your jerk trajectory to be nice and straight. If you have some issues, you might find it lands out to the side and you straighten up, things like that. You can still perform that legally if your elbows are fully locked out. I believe it wouldn't be a press out. But another thing that's considered less is it gives you more options. So, say in the backswing, if you've got more flexibility, you can bend forward to a greater extent to increase the amplitude of the backswing or increase the duration or height of the backswing, which may be useful to spare the grip. Or as you get tired in the jerk, you might find you have more range to get under the bell, so you can increase your second dip, which is a common thing that more advanced people do. Instead of increasing the first dip, they drop under. So the benefit of that is eccentric muscle actions or negatives are more energy efficient, but they do contribute to more muscle damage. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword there, but it shouldn't be too bad. So quickly on passive treatments, such as massage, joint manipulation, foam rolling, things like that. They predominantly work on the brain and they can be really powerful for reducing pain, but often the benefits are transient. So, um, you know, if you regularly foam roll before you train, that's totally fine. Just be aware that you probably want to replicate that when you compete, or wean yourself off that eventually so you don't need to use it so much. Now, again, that can be really useful. And typically, I would recommend this if you're trying to improve your range of motion. So, say if you weren't able to get into good extension in the overhead position, and that as a consequence you were struggling. So, when you've got two bells, you need to probably move your spine more forward and backwards because you have less what we call degrees of freedom. You don't really have the subtle, with the snatch, you can side bend ever so subtly, and you can get your scapula or your shoulder blade into a slightly better position, which will make it just ever so slightly easier to be completely vertical. So if you're one of these people who has really good position with one arm, but then two, it's just a little bit trickier. It's often, um, well, there can be a few areas. And also, if you ever have any injuries, you probably need to get those addressed first. And it's probably not in the scope of the podcast to talk about this, but that's just something to bear in mind. We often have old injuries that can be problematic, but putting that aside, maybe in this case, just to make your fixation slightly better, doing some extensions or general rolling through your spine, you might find you can get into a slightly better position. So that's sort of those passive modalities, very, very briefly. Um, so you can use those if you're as part of your warm up if you're trying to increase your range of motion. But typically, I encourage people to use more active um, approaches or modalities. So, and I've broken it down into general physical preparation and specific physical preparation exercises, which might not be the best terminology, but that's just what came to mind. So you've got your Jefferson curls or J curls, hangs on the bar. You can do active and passive hangs, side bends with your hands beside your body or even above, Romanian deadlifts, bridging, and pullovers. So the Jefferson curl is a really good one because it follows that classic, what we call lumbopelvic rhythm. And in the textbooks, what should happen is, if you're sort of using that segmental approach, you're tucking one vertebra at a time and you're coming down, you're flexing your spine. When that reaches typically its full range of motion, it transitions into the hips, and the back should actually switch off. It should go to passive um, control, and then the hips are sort of active, and then it reverses. And I don't think it works exactly like that in everyone, but that's is a it should be how for most people it works. Again, we are individuals, but people with lower back pain often stay really active through that lumbopelvic rhythm that don't switch off. So that's a really interesting thing to consider. But I would use that if you're trying to play around with your hip flexibility. If you really struggle to touch your toes or bend forward with relatively straight legs getting close to parallel with your back straight, then it's probably a good option for you. Again, if you have any issues with your back and stuff, you can talk to someone about that first. Hangs on the bar. I was recommended that by Valery Fedorenko, probably around 2010 or so. And that's always been a good one for me. I like to do a variety of different hangs because it's also useful for your grip, but getting some time overhead, and it's kind of the opposite to you know jerks and pushing and all that sort of overhead stuff. Side bends can help with the rack. RDLs are really great for those hip flexion or hamstring sort of mobility. Bridging can be good again for the spine, and the pullovers are good for the chest and lats and stuff like that. Now, when we're doing active exercises, especially if we've got that eccentric muscle action, that negative, it can actually change the muscle architecture. And resistance training has been shown to improve flexibility as well as, it's sort of comparable to stretching. But again, I put that caveat in at the start that when if you talk to people who are like really, really flexible, they often do a lot of stretching, a variety of different styles as well, whether that be a martial artist, they're doing lots of, you know, just static stretching, but then they're doing their dynamic work in their kicks and things like that. So that's just something to consider. But again, active approaches train both the hardware and the software. So, when I was saying with the passive treatments, it's predominantly the nervous system, um, whereas with those active components, you might change the muscle length or the fascicle length, which can change the position in which it can change the torque curve. So basically, as you get more fascicles or more sarcomeres in the series, sorry. Um, so typically on ultrasound, just to clarify that, you can see the um, sort of the length of the muscle, but it's hard to tune into the actual sarcomeres, which are the contractile properties. So you probably need more sensitive imaging there, but often they use the two interchangeably. But the sarcomere is the contractile unit of the muscle, and you can get more in a series with training, and that can help with power because you've got more units to shorten at the same rate in concentric or shortening power. Um, and again, it can just change the position in which the body is strongest and stuff like that, or the length torque curve. Now, that's probably a little bit over the top on some detail there, but again, the really key take home is an active approach will typically change the muscle and or tendon as well. Now, I'm not saying you can't use static stretching. So loaded stretching, or aggressive, like dynamic stretching, ballistic stretching can also change the muscle architecture. Um, if you're doing aggressive static stretching, that's probably also putting tension on the muscle or components of the muscle that sense tension, which will cause it to adapt. Whereas if you're doing gentle stretching, it's actually gentle stretching is great for increasing your range of motion, but it will be typically transient and but also it's good for calming the nervous system down. So that could be a good approach if you want to work on your recovery and things like that. Now, just quickly talking about specific sort of exercises, you've got your classic rack holds. So the Jefferson curl would be a good example if you're trying to improve your thoracic flexion, getting those shoulder blades coming forward to help you rest your elbows on your hips. And then a specific example, so you might even do that and then go into your rack holds, or you can do your rack walks. The benefit of the rack walks is you're getting that hip extension, excuse me, as you're walking, and that can be useful because if you're not able to tuck your pelvis under, you shouldn't have to think too much about it. It should sort of naturally happen. That can really help with the rack position if your pelvis can posteriorly rotate. And with that in mind, I could have probably put in a variety of other exercises in this GPP section. Now we've got overhead walks. Again, if you use two bells, your spine can really typically only go back and forth, not so much side to side. If you do one, you can slightly side bend, even if it's just subconscious, you'll orientate yourself to be in the sort of ideal position. Still a great exercise, but maybe not as conducive to improving your mobility. And probably one of the key exercises is to do the events with pauses, and mainly for, say, the jerk, pausing in the first dip, pausing in the second dip, and just making sure you can keep your elbow connected to your body, and then you can move into a powerful bump phase. Things like that will probably be your best test to see if it's working. And if it's not working, then you can just reinforce that technique. And you can keep those exercises in there to hopefully over time get better and better. And particularly with the rack position, it does just take a lot of time. Um, moving along, or I should say also with the trajectory, if you've got sort of tight shoulders, sometimes you'll sort of go out like a bit of a C or a bracket with the trajectory, and we really want it to go straight. And sometimes being more flexible can help with that and help you sort of accept the bells with the wrists kind of more over the shoulders as opposed to going out wide and coming in. So again, here's um, the jerk. For those of you on the podcast, I've just got a picture of the jerk and its phases here, and likewise with the snatch. So basically, when you don't have an injury and you're looking to improve your mobility, you might like to start with your sort of passive approach, such as foam rolling is probably the easiest one. Then you can do some dynamic exercises, such as if you're trying to improve your rack position, maybe a Jefferson curl, things like that. And then you might go into a rack hold or a rack walk. Another example could be, foam rolling again through the thoracic spine or the upper back, going into some bridging, and then going into a jerk or a pause jerk, and just working on hitting those key positions. So I hope that's helpful. This one went over time, but let me know if you've got any more questions. Again, this is just sort of scratching the surface of this topic. I might write a blog to explain some of the details that I was talking about, how the muscle changes. I didn't really talk about how the tendon changes, but those are things to consider. But basically, the take home is free it up, and then you want to work it in. So it teaches your body to use that range of motion. Hope that makes sense. Cheers. Bye.